Hey everyone, welcome to another brief hot take. I want to do a hot take on this Greta kid that showed up at the UN. I'm not down with this whole listening to a 15-year-old to solve the world's climate crisis. I mean, maybe it's just me, but teenagers aren't, super smart generally. They might have some knowledge, and look, it's nice the kid wants to get involved, but does anybody really think like she's a scientist that has really gotten behind this, or is representative of the world? uh, I mean, the stats on climate change are pretty staggering. Most of it's coming from China and India, because that's where most of the people in this world live. And what people in the United States always forget is most people in the United States are part of the 1%. Remember the Occupy Wall Street protest, where they talked about the 1% in the United States? The 1% controls everything. Newsflash, the 1% is the population of most of the United States. If you make more than $32,000 a year, I think it is, you're in the 1%. And that's most people in the United States. And a lot of people in Europe. And Canada. A lot of people in Canada, probably better than 50% of their population. So that's the West. That's like, we live in the 1%. Just like the 1% in America lives high on the hog, and we could barely imagine it, that we, living the lives we do, most people, I'm not in the 1%, by the way. I have not been in that in a while. But, most people, they live in the 1%, outside the 1%. They can't even imagine what it's like. They can't even imagine what it's like to, be too fat, right? Like, that's just not a problem when you're poor and in India or in China or wherever. Like, obesity is not an issue usually when you're poor, like really poor. I'm not talking America poor. I'm talking actual poor. America poor, you could still be making close to $32,000 a year and live moderately comfortable. Like to them, the video games and the internet and owning your own computer and house and car and all these wonderful things, that's just a dream to them. It's a dream. They work their whole lives for something like that. They work their whole lives just to get a little bit of comfort. So all these people, all these millions and millions of people are working to what we have. And we pollute a lot. Let's be honest. We pollute. Now, we're not the most of the polluters, because we just don't have the numbers, but all those people who are currently polluting want to pollute at least as much as we do, if not more. And they don't care. Like, when you're poor, you don't care that, you get like a packaged good and eat it and then throw it on the ground. Like, that's not really an issue for you. Like, you're poor. You might even take that plastic package and wash it out and use it for something if you're that poor. But, it's not like you're going to sit up at night and go, oh my God, the climate. No, you're sitting up at night going, oh my God, how are we going to eat next week? Or, oh my God, we're about to be evicted. Or, oh my God, my kid is sick. I don't have the money for the medicine. And it's not to say we should completely ignore the climate, but, the idea that world governments are the solution. Have you seen the work of these guys? Have you seen what they've done to, let's say, economically, when the World Bank, how they put countries into debt knowingly and keep them there so they can manipulate their governments? What do you think's going to happen when you throw environmentalism into the mix? It's not going to be a bright and sunny world and where we have zero carbon emissions. It's going to be yet another tool to keep other countries down and to extract money from other people, including you. So the world governments are not, repeat, not the people to handle this, Greta. And because you're 15 or 16, however old you are, you haven't been around long enough to see how world governments just screw people. How like 10 years go by and all the crap that they said was going to kill us doesn't even matter anymore. 10 years. 10 years was 2009. Think back to that for a minute, if you're old enough to. Greta's not. She was 5. So, in 2009, Barack Obama was president. We had a huge banking crisis. We thought, oh my God, the world's going to end. People went on unemployment everywhere, and it was a tough time. I mean, tough relative for the people in the United States. There were no jobs, and people were losing jobs left and right. The nonprofit industry, basically collapsed. I know that because I knew somebody in the nonprofit world, and they lost their job, and that was it. So what happened to all that? Oh, that's not a problem anymore because now there are jobs. That was the problem for a while, and now it's like, that's not a problem. No one's talking about that. What happened to Trump being a Russian bot? I mean, you want him to initiate climate change. I thought he was a Russian bot. If he's a Russian bot, what if the dastardly Russians tell him to destroy the planet? I mean, there are all these things that run through the news cycle that people just forget. An Inconvenient Truth. Al Gore made this movie. Said we were all dead by 2012. The ice caps were going to melt. New Jersey would be underwater. It's not underwater. That doesn't mean things aren't happening. It's just happening at a much slower rate. And honestly, it could be that it's a self-correcting situation. That, yeah, we're effing up the climate, but the climate's correcting itself in some way. That there's some mechanism that we don't fully understand that's washing everything out, fixing it all. Or not. I mean, it could be true that we're all going to die, but do you really think the world governments could get together and stop climate change without murdering millions of people? I don't. I think their solution would be to declare martial law, take over everything, ration the food and water, and put us all under an oppressive regime. That would never end. Because let's say they did that to stop climate change. Okay? You give these people all this power, they declare martial law, the zero carbons, we're all walking around, we're taking horse and buggy everywhere, we're all dirt poor, we're all growing turnips in our backyards, and everybody in the United States who was living in the world of the 1%, well, we give up all that. We're all living on like $10K a year, so the rest of the world can live on $10K a year, most of them. And now there are all these rules that you got to follow just so your carbon footprint is exactly zero. And if you don't follow them, oh man, you're in big trouble. You go to jail, you have to do hard labor, whatever you do. When do you think they're going to stop that? I'll tell you when. Never. They're going to stop it when people finally go, F this, and they overthrow the government. Because governments never give back their power. You have to take it back from them. People have to take it back from them. You cannot trust these guys. So I do not trust the world governments to deal with climate change at all. What I do trust is technology. Technology will figure it out. When there was that big Gulf spill, remember that? That was a huge thing. Kevin Costner's brother invented this machine that would go along and pick up all the oil. He's also got another machine, I think, that picks up the trash. They're going to invent a machine that cleans the ocean, eventually. Now, some animals might die in between then and might not totally work out perfectly, but they're going to invent something. You know, there was a time when there were a lot of endangered species, and a lot of them are off the list now. You can turn things back. We're not all going to die. You know, and you got all these climate changers who are just like, we're going to die. We're going to die unless we do something drastic. That's what they said when Al Gore was saying it. When I was a kid in school, we watched a short film hosted by Leonard Nimoy, Mr. Spock, who talked about the far-off future of, I believe it was 1983. And in 1983, the population was going to be so high, we wouldn't have enough food for everybody. And it would be a crazy dystopia if we don't do something soon. That didn't happen in 1983. Just like we didn't all end up underwater in 2012. So I wouldn't trust these guys' predictions, because I think they're trying to scare you in order so you give up some of your freedom or liberty or whatever you want to call it, so you'll follow their guidelines. They're not perfect scientists who are only going to tell you just to do this little amount to correct things. They get an inch, they take a mile. So Greta, you're not old enough to understand that, because you haven't been screwed over by your government yet. They're treating you wonderfully because you're a 15-year-old kid, and governments don't like to pick on 15-year-olds. It's bad optics. So you don't know what you're talking about, and we shouldn't listen to you, and we definitely shouldn't listen to the UN, because that's like the government squared. I mean, look at all their accomplishments. So everybody just calm down about climate change. I'm not saying deny it. I'm not saying things aren't happening. Things are happening. But we have to calm down. We have to look to technology to develop something that will fix things. So my theory, I'll give you my theory to fix. This was a big issue, and I don't hear them talking about it anymore, but the holes in the ozone layer. Because they said every time they set up a space shuttle, punches a hole in the ozone layer. Every time they set up a satellite or whatever, CFCs were destroying the ozone. This was a big problem, causing more sun and heating up the... I mean, this was a big thing. I hardly hear anybody talk about it. But I have an idea to fix the ozone. Somebody has to develop little drones, and they already have them. And all they would do, you make millions of these tiny, cheap drones, and all they do is they go up into the atmosphere, and they take oxygen molecules, and they put them together, because the ozone is made up of O2. Two oxygen molecules, or atoms, put together. So molecules are atoms. Oxygen? No, I guess they're atoms. Together, they're molecules. So, just to make ozone molecules. And you'd have to make, let's say, millions of these drones, and you just set them up there, and they operate 24 hours a day. You can just monitor their progress until they make enough ozone, close up all the holes. That's my theory. I'm not a scientist. I just have imagination. So that's my 2 cents. So if you're a scientist, get on that. And for the rest of you, stop panicking about the climate. Don't jump on board with this whole climate change thing so readily. Their solutions will probably suck. That, again, not to say to ignore climate change, but I would ignore the government solution for climate change and look to scientists and learned people who are outside the government, and because the government don't listen to these people. They listen to certain people that help forth their agenda. So I don't think we should do much of anything, because really, what's the solution? Are we going to stop the emerging middle class in China and India from getting Xboxes and cable TV and McDonald's food? Well, not McDonald's in India, obviously, but you know what I'm saying. You're not going to stop them. So what's the solution? You're going to bomb them to save the environment? It's not going to work. The best you can do is you can talk to them and say, hey, slow it down, please. You know what the biggest polluter is on the face of the earth? Military. The U.S. military is one of the biggest polluters. And so if we stopped all these wars, that would stop a lot of pollution. It's a ton of depleted uranium all over Iraq. It's not doing anybody any good. And there's tons and tons of pollution from burning munitions, of burn pits. I mean, that's something we can control. We can stop those wars. We can bring the troops home. We can take all those resources and apply it to something else and not pollute. Explosions pollute. Bullets pollute. Let's stop that, Greta.